Howdy my totally as always tubular gamers, and we're back with, you guessed it, another ranking video. And today we're going to be talking about another fighting game series. We're going to be talking about a little known series called Darkstalkers. Now Darkstalkers, for the unfamiliar, is known in Japan as Vampire, and it's a fighting game series created by Capcom. The first Darkstalkers, The Night Warriors, was released all the way back in arcades in '94, and it really was like one of the first fighting games Capcom ever made that wasn't Street Fighter 2. I know, shocking. And it was very different from Street Fighter to really any other fighting game series on the market at the time. The series was set in this really gothic horror universe with characters based on monsters from international folklore, and it had a really stylized 2D graphical art style that just looked crazy for the time. The game would introduce a bunch of gameplay mechanics that would be used in later Street Fighters, Marvel vs. Capcom, really just other fighting games in general. And the game would have a couple iconic characters, particularly Morgan and Felicia, who have gotten into plenty of other Capcom fighting games. In fact, I would say they're the most popular things from this entire series. And you know, seeing them for so long in other Capcom fighting games, it really got me wondering, what about the games they came from? How are the Darkstalkers games? Well, thanks to the Capcom Fighting Collection, I was able to actually try all of the Darkstalkers games, and now I'm here to rank all of them for you. And you know how these go, give them all a little review. I am no fighting game expert. I really am not an expert at these games. I can't tell you frame data. I can't tell you all the in-depth mechanics, which this game has a lot of. But what I can tell you is a pretty casual overview about my time with each of these games. Now, the Darkstalkers series, when it comes to how many games are in the series, it's a bit confusing. So let me just run it down for you real quick to tell you what I'm looking at in this video. So there was Darkstalkers, The Night Warriors, the original game. Then there was Night Warriors, Darkstalkers Revenge, which is essentially the second game, and then there was Vampire Savior, which is really Darkstalkers 3. And then here's where things get a little confusing. They released updated versions of Vampire Hunter and Vampire Savior, titling them Vampire Hunter 2 and Vampire Savior 2 like they were full-blown sequels, but these are not. These are updated versions with different characters and some gameplay mechanics, similar to Street Fighter 2 and its many versions. So for the sake of this ranking video, we're gonna just combine Vampire Hunter 2 and Vampire Savior 2 into those original games, Vampire Hunter and Savior. So really what we're going to be looking at today is 3 Darkstalkers games. There was also a number of compilations, being Darkstalkers Chronicles, The Chaos Tower for PSP, there was Vampire Darkstalkers Collection on PS2, Darkstalkers Resurrection on PS3 and 360, and then finally the Capcom Fighting Game Collection. We're going to be here all day if I'm explaining the release history of these games. So we're going to be looking at the 3 main Darkstalkers games. Ranking them worst to best, give them a casual little review. Let me know down below your favorite. Let's just get right into this before we take too long in the intro. Like, share, sub, comment, all that good stuff. What do I think is the weakest of these 3 games? And so here we have the original Darkstalkers, The Night Warriors, releasing all the way back in arcades in '94. Now, something everyone immediately noticed about Darkstalkers was that it had a totally different theme and atmosphere going about it than no other fighting game series had going at the time. Instead of it being, you know, just casual people fighting each other, maybe like warriors of some kind, not here. It was monsters. It was gothic monsters. It was like classic folklore monsters here, like werewolves and vampires and zombies and succubuses. And this game just had this style that no other fighting games really had at this time. Not only did it look amazing for the time, but just the aesthetics in general were really unseen. It was one of the first games to use Capcom's new arcade board, and it really pushed the hardware to its limits. When it came to the character roster, like I said, they were all folklore monsters, but there were some really iconic characters immediately spawned in this game, like Felicia, like Morgan, like Dimitri, like Bishamon, and the list goes on and on. It's one of the most iconic parts of the entire game is really the character roster. In fact, I'd argue that some of these characters have gotten more popular than this entire series, like Morgan. And even all these years later, I think the roster is still really cool. And so what are all these monsters going to do? Well, they're going to fight each other, of course. Now, there is a story to this game. It's about this alien demon Pyron invading Earth to add to his collection of planets, and the world's most fearsome monsters are the last defense of the planet. But like every fighting game from the 90s, the story isn't too important here. What's really important is the fighting and the mechanics. And I gotta say that this game, you know, while it has aged in a number of different aspects, it still actually feels pretty decent to play nowadays. It is not aged badly, actually. It's actually aged quite well for '94. It's aged better than a lot of, say, SNK's fighting games from the early 90s. I'd say when it comes to its core fighting mechanics, it's closest to Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. However, there are a bunch of new additions here that were new for Capcom fighting games at the time, such as air blocking, crouch walking, and even chain combos. The game features a special meter similar to the Super Combo gauge, and each player could perform a unique combo much like the Super Turbo one. It's called ES in Darkstalkers. And something unique about the special in Darkstalkers is that it drains over time. You can't just save it for the last minute like you can in most fighting games. You actually want to use your super move as soon as possible, really. But I think all of this leads to a pretty fun fighting game where you're just beating the crap out of each other with some of your favorite monsters. The game is decently fast for the time. It's not like crazy fast, but I'd say it's on the level of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and it's got a good pace to it. I've had some fun in the multiplayer with the boys, and it's cool that all these years later the game is still pretty approachable, and you can play it on modern hardware with the Capcom Fighting Collection. And so if you want to see where the Darkstalkers series got its start, I have no problem recommending the game. I think you'll get a fun little time out of it. And here we have Night Warriors Darkstalkers Revenge, releasing in arcades in '95. This is the follow-up to the original Darkstalkers. Now, despite it being a follow-up, it actually has the exact same plot and even endings as the first game, where Pyron invades Earth to add it to his collection of planets he devoured, and the world's most fearsome monsters are the last line of defense. So when it comes to its character roster, just about everybody returns here, so you've got a decent start. And it lets you play as the two bosses from the first game, so Pyron and then Hoitzel. I'm probably saying that wrong. And then it also introduces two new characters, Donovan, who's awesome, and then Heisenko. Probably not saying that right either. Now, despite the difficult to pronounce names, these are some of the more iconic characters from Darkstalkers that have appeared in other Capcom fighting games, and I quite like them here also. Now, when it comes to the actual fighting gameplay, it is pretty similar to the first game in a number of different aspects. I will say it feels a bit slower, at least it felt slower to me. I cannot confirm this with like hard data, but it felt a bit slower, and it feels a bit floatier. And then there are several other tweaks and changes to the formula from the first game. Some of these include the introduction of chain combos, and players can actually choose between a normal gameplay style or one that has auto blocking. I'm not a fan of auto blocking in any game, so I don't know why this is here. But the biggest change by far has to be the ability for the player to stock up on their special gauge, allowing them to actually store more than one special gauge and preserve them through the entire match. So here you can actually store them up, and there's two special attacks. There's the ES special, which uses some of the bar, and the EX special, which actually requires an entire stock of the special gauge, and this would go on to be in other Street Fighter games as well. So, you know, it got its start way back here, and I actually like this implemented system. I think that it adds some strategy here and some depth. And when it comes to depth, it seems like there's a lot more here than the first game. I mean, just the addition of chain combos really adds a lot to that. And then, you know, the whole special gauge stuff. Some of the characters have also been tweaked a bit. Not everyone is exactly the same. Some characters, you know, have some new moves, have been updated, nerf, buff, etc. You know, what you expect from a fighting game. Visually, the game looks really similar to the first game. It still looks great. It has a ton of personality and style and charm, and the music's great. It animates great. There's a ton of frames of animation here, so sometimes it just goes nuts, but I generally like the aesthetics here, and I think the game still looks pretty good. It still holds up gameplay-wise also, just like the first one. It's still a fun time. Have had some fun in the multiplayer. Should you play this over the first game? I mean, I would say it's a little better than the first game. And you can actually check it out on modern hardware with the Capcom Fighting Collection. There was also Vampire Hunter 2, which was basically an updated version of Vampire Hunter mixed with Vampire Savior, but this is actually an inferior version to the original, at least I believe so. There are probably videos that are 10-20 minutes long getting knee-deep into all the technical aspects as to why Vampire Hunter 2 is not as good as the original Vampire. But I'm going to just keep it pretty casual and say that there's a number of changes here and some character roster changes that I'm not a big fan of. And I think if you're going to play a Vampire Hunter, you should play just the original Vampire Hunter. It seems to be what the community plays as well, and I will leave it at that. But Vampire Hunter, it's a pretty solid fighting game. And so here we have Vampire Savior, also known as Darkstalkers 3, and I believe this is not only the best Darkstalkers game, but one of the best fighting games Capcom has ever actually put out. It does have a different story from the other Darkstalkers games, and it centers around this demonic nobleman named Jeddah, who creates this pocket dimension where he tries to bring in souls to help him nourish his new world. And you know, as luck would have it, a number of the souls that show up are characters from the first two Darkstalkers games, along with a few newcomers. I actually really like the setting of this game, and I think that it goes for an even cooler aesthetic and vibe than the first two games, if that's possible. Now, when it comes to the cast of characters, it has everyone from the original Darkstalkers. However, it omits Donovan, Hutzel, and Pyron from the lineup. Instead, we have 4 new characters. We have Jeddah, Lilith, QB, and BB Hood. All have become iconic characters to the series and really Capcom fighting games in general. While I'm sad to see my man Donovan not come back, these 4 new characters are pretty great. Jeddah's cool, QB's good, Lilith is pretty similar to Morgan but still cool, and then there's of course BB Hood, which is great. Alright, good character roster aside, we have the gameplay, which is different in a number of aspects when compared to, the previous 2 Darkstalkers games. The first is that it actually drops the whole traditional round-based system in favor of the damage gauge system, which is actually really similar to Killer Instinct, where instead of having 2 rounds, each fighter has 2 life bars and corresponding life markers. So if one character's life gauge runs out, the characters will reset their position, but the other character doesn't get all their health back, it just continues on from how it was going to begin with. And when you are attacked in this game, a small portion of your life will actually be displayed in white, which can be recovered if you don't take any more damage. This game also introduces the Dark Force system, which uses a bar super meter to allow players to perform special abilities unique to each character for a limited period of time. This adds even more strategy to the special meter and just all your special moves in general. And I think there's just a lot more depth and strategy to this game than any of the other Darkstalkers games. This game is crazy fast. You can actually control the speed, and you can make this game go at a decent rate, or you can make it go incredibly fast. But this game flows a lot better than the other Darkstalkers games. In fact, the flow and the pacing are actually really good in this game. It feels really nice. It controls really nice. It's really smooth and responsive. One of the best of any Capcom game. And I was having an absolute blast just beating the shit out of my friends with my favorite monsters. I think the roster is really fun to play as. I think some of the characters have been tweaked a little bit for the better, it seems. And there's just so many great characters here, and it just feels so nice to pull off combos, chains, supers, etc. And then on top of this, the game looks amazing. It has a great aesthetic. It's really got some nice vibes. And then the music, the music's great also. Now, over the years, Vampire Savior actually got a couple updates as well. There was Vampire Hunter 2, which I briefly mentioned, but there's also Vampire Savior 2, and despite it having 2 in the name, this is really, again, just another situation of Capcom just updating that original game, adding some changes, and just like Vampire Hunter 2, Vampire Savior 2 is considered an inferior version to the original Vampire Savior. You know what? Community does exist for this game, which isn't the largest, but it is dedicated. They're playing Vampire Savior 1. They're not playing this newer version. People don't like a lot of the changes. Again, there's probably videos that go really into the nitty-gritty as to why Vampire Savior 2 is not as good as the first one. There's some character changes. There's some tweaks with the movement, like you can just do infinite grabs. They removed air chains. There's a bunch of reasons why Vampire Savior 2 is not as good as the first Vampire Savior, and I don't think that version's worth playing. Play the original Vampire Savior. It's on the Capcom Fighting Collection. This game is great. I actually had a lot of fun playing this one with the boys, more so than any of the other Vampire games. The game has actually aged really well, and I'm really surprised that there hasn't been some kind of modern HD remake, re-release of this game, in the sense that, Street Fighter 2's gotten so many. I mean, there's even that one on the Switch back when it came out. Why hasn't Vampire Saviors gotten some huge, massive overhaul? There's been some re-releases over the years, but I'm talking like a full-on overhaul. I'd love to see it, because this game is just a blast, and I have no problem recommending it to anybody who likes fighting games. But that's it for today's video, not the longest video, but I just wanted to talk some Darkstalkers for a little bit, and not every video needs to be some huge epic journey, right? At least a journey for me, playing these games, editing, recording, all of that fun stuff. But hey, that's it for today. Hope everyone has a wonderful day. Like, share, sub, comment, all that good stuff. Bye-bye now.